So I think we'll start. So already 15 people joined. And by the time we finish the introduction, maybe more people will join. So welcome to our second event. This is, we've already last week had our first event with Dmitry about deploying models with AWS SageMaker. Today is our second event. We'll talk on a different topic. We'll talk about customer segmentation. And Nishant will present something. And then we'll have a couple of more events in the pipeline. Next week, Artemi will talk about fighting fraud with triplet loss. It will be about CMS networks. And then it will be another talk in December, more on the software side, how to present things for data scientists. In addition to that, we have a...
life cycle ID, okay.
Yes, did you want to ask something? Sorry. Okay, I'll continue that. So in addition to that, we have a different type of event. We haven't done this yet. First, we'll have the first event this week, more like a discussion than a presentation, where we will just talk without slides on certain topics. This week on Friday, we'll talk about roles in the data team. And then the next week, we'll talk about different processes for machine learning projects. If you haven't joined yet, so you can join our Slack community using this link. It will directly bring you to Slack. Simple, join datatalks.club. And I recently found out that there is another datatalks.club with dashes, and people asked me, hey, is it your website? So interesting, I didn't know about that. So careful, no dashes in the URL. And then the last thing is today for questions, we will use Slido. I'll send a link now to the chat. So basically, if you have a question during the talk, go there to Slido, ask your question, and also upvote the questions of others if something was asked already. I'll share the link now. And Nishant, I think you can start. The floor is yours.
All right. Thank you, Alex.
Yeah, thanks for coming.
So guys, my name is Nishant. I'll give a brief intro about myself. So I am a postgraduate in Masters in Computer Science, Data Science from Trinity College, Dublin. And prior to this, I have 4 years of work experience in US healthcare analytics, wherein I worked on in customer and product analytics in depth. So this project, customer segmentation, I received this as a part of a hiring process for a company. And then I thought that this was a really interesting project because so it's very much relevant because, you know, it's just not a challenge or an exercise just to test the technical capabilities, but it actually solves a problem, right? Some problem which the company is actually facing, right? So I thought that let's give this project my deep insights. So I'll share my screen now. Just a second. Yep, all right. So for this, before I begin, I wish to show you the data because that's where data scientists and analysts wish to start, right? So this is the kind of data that player IDs, right? So in this project, I'm going to segment customers. So I have 500,000 customers for a gaming company, and their behavioral based data, right? And like when they installed the game, what is the number of active days? That is how many days they were active on the platform. When were they active last? Their last active day. Which one are the leaders that they most selected in the game, the civilization they selected. So these these two are highly specific to the game, that they won't make much sense.
I'm
Right.
sorry. You're sharing. So what we see is your PowerPoint. Are you showing
Oh,
something
okay.
else?
Yep. Just a second. Yep. So this is the data. Sorry about that, guys. So I have here 500,000 player IDs for each of the player. And then we have their install date, their active days, how many days were they active on the platform, their last date that they were active, their leaders more selected and the civilization more selected. So this is very much specific to the game. And then these are the main fields that we are interested in. So these are, we have here 8 different fields, which mean different kinds of downloadable content or an expansion pack that they downloaded or purchased in the game, right? So as you can see, we have a lot of blank data here, which is very much expected, right? Because when you're a player, you may not buy anything apart from the base game. So we have the base game here, which is the install date, right? So now I'll go back to the presentation. So the challenge here is that we need to segment the players so that a personalized marketing campaign could be produced for them, right? So for each player, the company wants to send them an email, let's say, or an in-game notification, if they will, yeah. So with with such emails or push app notifications, we as a company, so a company may want to promote the users some specific types of downloadable content or an expansion pack for the base game, right? So for this, what I do is, so here is the breakup of what we are going to talk about today. Going to explain about the methodology, and then the main KPIs we have are the recency, frequency, monetary value, response time, and purchase frequency. So generally, when you talk about customer segmentation, it mainly comes to RFM analysis, which means recency, frequency. Sorry. Yeah. So it mainly comes down to recency, frequency, and monetary value. And these are generally the three main KPIs that a customer segmentation is based on. But then while looking at the data, I was kind of sure that there are two other metrics that I should be taking care of, which means I should be taking care of response and the purchase frequency. And I'll talk about these metrics in more detail in the next section. And then finally, I'll show the clustering and segmentation. How do I divide my populations? And then finally, understanding those segments and designing strategy for each of them. Right. So the methodology. First, I'll segregate the players into the responders and non-responders. Here, the responders are those which have actually, bought or downloaded another content other than the base game, right? So they are the responders, and those who have not interacted with the Play Store after purchasing the base game, they are non-responders, right? And then I formulate the key performance indicators for them based on extensive EDA, and I perform unsupervised clustering analysis, find optimum number of segments, and then analyze non-responders as well. So here for clustering analysis, I consider only the responders. And in step 4, I take all those who are actually non-responders and segment them as well. And then I finally study the characteristics of all of those segments and devise a marketing strategy for each of them. Right, so modified version of RFM analysis. So recency, frequency, monetary value, which are the generally pillars of a customer segmentation process, are So in this particular scenario, when was the player last active? That would be his recency. His frequency would be how many days has the player been active, right? So if a player is playing more, if there's a gamer who's playing more, we may want to, promote the game more to him. We may want to, we may want to be active in giving out advertisements to him. And then the monetary value, how much has they already spent? So if we identify players who are high spenders, who are ready to spend more, we may want to give them more ads. We may want to promote them to more. The purchase frequency, what is the average number of days between purchases of the player? So this is different from the frequency, right? The frequency is how many days have they been active on the platform, while the purchase frequency is the average number of days between their purchases. So it's possible that a gamer, he has bought 10 different types of downloadable content, but then he has not been very active. So he'll be scored less on this metric, but high on this. Responses. How many add-ons did the player buy previously? Right. So the number of how much has he bought. So let's dive deeper into these. So the recency, which is available in data as the last active day. So I saw that the data, it was from quarter 4 of 2016 to quarter 4 of 2019, and the last day active, it was fairly highly concentrated towards 2019. And the players, so we need to remember that this does not, we cannot say that there were more players in 2017 rather than 2019 just by judging from this, because the player who signed up or who downloaded in 2017 might still be playing in 2019, and there would be even more players who will be downloading and installing in 2019, right? So but still, for every player we do have a recency score, so this just means that we have more players in 2019. But again, we want to capture the players with high recency because they have been active lately, right? So if a player was last seen in 2017, he'll probably not play again 2020, right? The frequency. So this in data, we have this as active days. So how many days has the player been active? So this trend is somewhat expected, right? Because most of the players, they'll be active for lesser number of days, and we have much less number of players who are active more, who are reliable players, right? So although this is highly skewed, this is exponential, and notice the log scale of this chart. So close to 1% population is active more than 336 days. So even in this chart, we have high concentration in this area, which is less than 100 days. And after 336, the population is really just 1% of 500K players that we have. Right, so here what we need to target is, if this is a new player, we pick high frequency ones. And for all old players, we pick all, which means that if a player is old, his number of days active would be more, right? And if the player is new, we want ones who have been active very recently. Next is monetary value. So this monetary value was not available in data. And what I did was I just went to the website of this gaming company. And for this particular game, I took in all the data that I had on the prices, right? And using the dates available. So if in the data, a date is available for a particular downloadable content, then that means that player has installed it on that date. So I mapped using the dates that were given. I mapped the amount each player spends based on the dates, right? So the concentration here is mostly between 54 to 96, which means that the base game, it was for 55 euros as yep. So the base game is for 55 euros, and then if the player buys even just one downloadable content, he's still here. And then if he buys an expansion pack of the game as well, he'll probably lie in this after 100 euros category. So we want to we want to target the players who are spending more. Then the response history. Um, so for expansion packs and downloadable content. So expansion packs are generally more expensive as compared to downloadable content. And we see that less players are usually getting an expansion pack, while downloadable content was used by many others. And there are seven different, we have six downloadable contents. So most of them are having one downloadable content. Not many players buy more than one downloadable content. The purchase frequency. The purchase frequency here represents how much the average number of days in which the player installs a new pack again. So if I'm a player, I may want to, if I'm a good, like if I'm a regular player, I may want to, install and download new content every 5 days or 10 days or so, right? So I'll be more prone to respond to an advertisement. And while so we need to target those who have lower value of the metric, meaning speed buying, right? Now the clustering part. So with the K-elbow method, so I'm employing K means clustering here. So with these 5 KPIs that I identified, I decided that I'll choose 5 as the number of clusters. And this would give me a good balance of homogeneity and number of clusters as well. And again, for the non-responders, so this chart, all this analysis, all the KPIs, I showed that it was for the responders, but we still have non-responders, right? And I segment the non-responders based on their last active day. So if they are more active recently, I'll cluster them in cluster 5 and cluster 6, who are not active lately. So if we look at the average matrix for all these 7 different clusters, there's a high difference. So player count, although we have non-responders in very much high amounts, which is quite expected, right? And then active days, if you look at active days, they are very much, the mean active days is varying highly across the clusters, which is the aim of the clustering, right? So this means that the clusters are formed in a nice way. Last active day, the total money spent, the purchase frequency, right? So so what's the next strategy going forward? If we look at the strategy and the numbers we see from here, we can actually see how segment 0 are less active. Does that make sense here? So active days is the least, one of the least here, right? For cluster 0. And the last played is long back. So the last day active, it's quite, so lower number here means that they had been active early, like maybe towards 2017 or 2018, and a high number here, this means that they were active more recently. So we see that all these different segments are actually different. So this segment is less active, they played long back, maybe they've forgotten the game. And that's why in-game marketing probably won't work on them. The segment 1 is those who are highly active and install new content regularly. We don't want to lose them, and we want to target them with, with all that we can. Segment 2, they are less active but have been active recently, so we may lose them, right? Because they are less active, they have been active recently, so we just need to tempt them into buying, right? So aggressive marketing needed for them. Segment 3, who have been moderately active, don't mind spending, so they can spend more, right? So for these are stable cohort, and they are actually totally spending based on their whims. The marketing probably won't work on them. For segment 4, we have relatively low activity, but the spending habits are moderate, and they were seen recently. So still, they could still go, and we need to pitch in new features, maybe attempt them with some new features or some add-ons, or maybe some kinds of discounts, right? So pitch in new features for them. Segment 5, these guys are non-responders, they are less active, but they have been seen recently. So probably they are the ones who have recently downloaded the game. So we need to target them aggressively. The last one is the long-time non-responders. They probably downloaded the game in 2017 or 18. They have low activity, but they will not respond whatever you do. So no marketing for them. So this is the strategy that one should follow, the company should follow with these particular customers. And lastly, if I had access to, so if I have to actually do this project, what would I do? Analysis within clusters for personalized marketing, because here I have shown just on the hunches, and like they're less active, they are playing long back and forgotten the game like this. So this is just speculative, and we need detailed analysis of each of the cluster for personalized marketing, which includes what kind of tactics will be included in the emails or push-up notifications, exploring player-specific data. So if it is available, so for this particular exercise, I didn't have access to any other data, but then if at all it is available, maybe let's say if there is some kind of sign up required for playing the games, maybe we have more data relating to to the gamers. And then based on characteristics that we gather on the user, maybe we could model their behavior, and we could actually model the user, and that's how we could probably serve them with more personalized marketing. Of course, there could be use of geographic data to understand market needs as well. So it's highly possible that for some kinds of markets, we have some different kinds of downloadable content involved, right? So we have different kinds of locations. So if you imagine a game, there could be different kinds of locations that the game is set in. And maybe if the game is set in Mexico, the Mexican people would probably love it more, right? So in that case, the geographic data we need to understand that, and for localized downloadable content, it would be a great idea. That's it. So that was the project.
Yeah, thanks. That was really interesting for me, because I heard a lot about customer segmentation previously, but I didn't really know how it's done. Before we start with questions from the audience, I would like to ask a question I had during the presentation. So like you do this clustering analysis, you define these segments. I'm wondering, like, this is done manually, right? So every time you split the data into clusters, you need to look and analyze every cluster yourself and then describe it, right?
Yep. I did that manually for this one because so if I automate this, this may not make much sense, right? So I can set a threshold, like so if there are different kinds of Python libraries as well, which can give me an optimum number of clusters based on the computing performance and time taken to form the clusters, and the homogeneity of clusters as well. But then so in my case, this such an algorithm gave me an optimum number of 6 clusters, but then I decided to go with 5 clusters because I felt that it makes more sense for a small population.
Okay. Yeah, I think one of the questions was actually, what if we increase number of clusters to more than 5? And I think you partly answered that, but maybe you can give a
Yeah,
bit more
so
information.
again, if we actually increase the number of clusters, that would mean more kind of analyses needed for each within clusters features, right? So it comes to, I believe it will eventually boil down to a trade-off, right? So it will eventually boil down to a trade-off between the business requirements and the amount they're ready to spend on the game, right? Because we get, if there is more and more money, of course there can be more and more number of clusters. So so more number of clusters do mean more homogeneity within the clusters, and the targeting could be more perfect. But then at the same time, what needs to be taken care of is costs. With more number of clusters, there are more costs. Also, with more number of clusters, we may have less number of users within a cluster. So that's something that needs to be taken care of.
Yeah, seems reasonable. So it even increases the number of manual work you need to do, right? Because you need to
Yeah.
analyze each cluster.
Right.
So can you tell us a bit more about speed buying? I'm sure I understood the concept, and actually, to me, like also wasn't super clear. Like I think
Yeah.
one of the categories there, right? One of the groups
Mhm.
for one of the segments, you said like they are speed buyers, and who are these
Yeah,
users?
so by speed buying, I mean that the players who are maybe, playing a lot of game, right? So consider if I have bought a new game and I'm really liking the game, and I finished what was so all the maybe the missions, let's say the missions that are there in the base game are finished maybe, right? So I'll need a new downloadable content, or an expansion pack of the game, right? So in that case, if I'm playing with speed, I'll download new content more, right? So that's something which I call as speed buying. Is there a difference between cluster and segment? No, clustering and segment, that's one and the same thing here.
Okay, so I'm marking it as. I think like when you showed the screen with your segments, there was more than 5 segments, right? It was
Yeah,
6 or
yeah,
7.
that's because so I initially divided my population into two, which was the responders and
Uh-huh,
non-responders,
yeah, right.
right? And then for responders, I divided them into 5 clusters, and the non-responders, I divided them into 2 clusters.
Okay, makes sense. Thank you. So then the next question is, why did you include users that are no longer active?
Yeah, so the no longer active users, they are actually a cluster, right? They are still the customers. So when I'm saying about a segmentation analysis, they are the customers I have segmented, but I may not, in the next phase, I may not reach out to them, right? So in the analysis, in the beginning of analysis, I have all the population, which includes everyone who has ever bought the game. But then after all the clustering analysis, we finally have a cluster of the people, of the gamers who are no longer active, who haven't played in a long time, and who will probably not buy anything again as well, right? So that cluster is to be kept aside. We don't interact with them. We consider that these have gone.
Mhm. Yes, makes sense. Yeah, it also to me, like I was thinking, like whether introducing a lot of old data in the analysis will somehow skew the results. Maybe like if looking only at let's say last 1 year of customers, um, like maybe customers evolve over time.
Mhm.
Yeah, it could be interesting to see. Okay, so then aggressive marketing for segment two. I think these are users, as far as I remember, who you mentioned might
Yeah.
be about to leave.
Mm.
And then if we do this aggressive marketing for them, may it lead to losing these users, or maybe.
Right. So for segment two, let's go back to the slide. Should
Okay, I
we?
should stop sharing.
Yep. Yep. So for segment two, what we have is they are less active in general, but they have been active recently, won't shy away from spending. Let's look at their numbers. Segment two, this is first of all a big number, right? We have close to 60,000 players in this bucket. They have been active less. Last day active is recent. Number of responses is average. Amount spent is higher than average. Purchase frequency is less, right? So what I find out from this is, since the last active day is also quite recent, I believe these are the guys who have recently installed the game, right? So they are less active. So maybe they have installed the game recently and they haven't explored the game much. right? And they won't shy away from spending because they have recently bought it. And that's why I suggest that we need aggressive marketing for them, because we don't want them to you know to forget about the game.
Mhm.
Since they have been less active and they have bought recently, they will probably not play the game if we don't engage them actively.
Mhm.
Does that
So
make
what you're saying is like maybe these users will forget about us anyways, and like if they are annoyed by this push notification and delete it, they would delete it anyways, right?
Yeah, probably. So that's why we need to engage them.
Mhm. Okay, another question. Let me. I don't know if it makes sense to share my screen, but let's do that. What to do with new customers? Because I think
Interesting. That's a good question. So what to do with new customers? So maybe we can put them in with so there are two options that I see. One would be like make them a new cohort or a new segment, maybe customer segment um, 8, and maybe treat them differently. Or else, what we can do is we can put them in maybe with customer with segment 2 itself, because they are fairly new and they haven't probably they'll. So what I'm saying is maybe put them in a new segment, or the another option could be put them in the segment that resembles to them closest, the
mhm.
closest segment possible with the new customers.
Okay, so basically for each new customer, you look at the other segments and then you find out which is
Yeah.
the closest.
So we look at the segments and find out the one for which has players who have been active recently, or maybe who have bought the game recently.
Mhm. Okay, makes sense. Um, do you attempt to clean up clusters like removing outliers?
Yeah. So that's so this particular data, it doesn't really have outliers here. So when we talk about this, what kind of fields do we have? We have their install dates, which starts at a set time, right? So before 2017, this game didn't existed, and that's why the first date that's possible in the data is somewhere around January 2017, right? And the last date possible is the recent, like 2020 maybe. Yeah, so that's why, so all the data, all the features, they are date, right? Date columns. So that's why we don't really have outliers. And also, if we talk about the cost I have is for the 8 different types of downloadable content or the expansion packs, and that's why it doesn't vary much between. So as I showed the histogram, it doesn't have an outlier, any outliers.
Makes sense, and probably this data was cleaned a bit
Yeah,
before. Um, have you thought about using Bayesian uh,
yeah.
Gaussian mixture models to identify the optimal number of clusters automatically?
Well, I for this particular project, I had only 3 days to do, so I didn't. I already knew how to do k-means clustering, and this is k-means clustering, not k nearest neighbors. This is k-means clustering, and so that's what I already knew, and I knew that it can be done fairly quickly. So I didn't thought about using Bayesian Gaussian mixture model, but I think it could be uh, something that can be done.
Yeah, I think in addition to that, there are other clustering models that
Yes,
where you don't need to define the k, the number of clusters, they
yes.
just find out the optimal number.
Yeah, maybe hierarchical clustering could work as well, but
Mhm.
then it
Yeah.
just depends on the application.
Yeah, you also, I think, have quite a large data set. Then maybe for hierarchical, it may take
Yep, that's
a
right.
while. Okay, how would you take into account users moving between clusters across time? For example, same user can be in cluster 0 at one
That's right.
time, and then cluster 3 at time too.
That's right. Yep, that makes sense. A user can actually move between the clusters. That's right. But then, if you believe from marketing perspectives, you don't send. So these clusters or these segments, I don't intend them to be stationary segments. I believe. So let's say we run. The company runs this. campaign every month or maybe every quarter, right? So this whole algorithm, we can redo this algorithm. It's not very computationally expensive. So we can redo the algorithm, and the user, they can of course move between and across clusters, and based on, we can have fixed definitions of each clusters, like what do, how they're defined and what kind of marketing strategy we use for each of those clusters. But then when a user moves from one cluster to another, the marketing strategy we use on this user will change according to the cluster he moves to.
So basically, like, do this clustering analysis once, define like find out how the customers, the segments look like, come up with definitions, and then basically instead of doing clustering again for new users or for other users, basically just move them across segments, right?
Yes, so what I'm saying is, maybe we can have a fixed skeleton of the algorithm, right? And the definitions and the actions we take off on each of those clusters. And then as we move forward, maybe on monthly basis, we rerun the algorithm based on all the users we have. And that's when every user will move to maybe different clusters every month. And that's why the marketing strategy, it will change.
Yeah, makes sense. Another question is, how about using A/B testing to support your analysis?
Well, I would say A/B testing, it's kind of used in online setting more, right? Because for gaming, A/B testing may not really, it may not make sense. But if you think about it, uh, so for this particular application, I think a split testing may be useful, but then that totally depends. Again, it depends on the business, the problem, the amount of money they're ready to pour in. Of course, A/B testing would be the next step, because just making these clusters and then would not be sufficient, right? Of course, A/B testing would be needed. A split testing would be needed to check on the results. That's true.
Okay, makes sense. So basically, before you send pushes, you can decide if you actually want to send push or not, and then that will be the A/B test.
Or else maybe we can see what kind of different feedback, or what kind of different results are we getting from each of those clusters.
Okay, another question is, how would you measure that the number of segments was correct after implementing the strategy?
I think that this kind of relates to the previous question, right? Because if we have, so this kind of relates to two previous questions that we had. One was about A/B testing, and one was about number of clusters, right? So in the sense that it depends on the business, how much deep they want to go in, how much money are they ready to pour in. So if we have more number of clusters, we'll have to, do more kind of more level of split testing or A/B testing, and based on the results of that, that's how we realize that this is the correct. These are the correct clusters, and the number of segments that we made was correct or not. It all depends on the feedback that we receive from the users after the segmentation. That would be the next step.
Yeah, and probably, like from what I understood from your presentation, when you do this manual analysis of clusters, then you can already decide if it makes sense or not, right? Like it's one of like just an extra check. Like, okay, do these clusters make sense or not?
Mhm.
Okay. How would you validate the quality of your clusters in real world if they match or not with your interpretation?
Well, I believe one way is feedback forms. uh, like maybe we could send some sort of feedback emails to the users after they have responded, or they have not responded to the emails. That would be one way of knowing. So maybe more work needs to be done on the kind of feedback surveys we send out to the users. That would probably give us, so in the feedback survey, we could of course ask questions as that, were the advertisements relevant or not. That kind of answers this question.
Yeah. And then the last question that we have today is, what do you think about using user-to-user recommender system? And then combine the results, combine the users in groups based on similarity instead of clustering.
Do you think it should?
Yeah, so basically, like the way I interpret it is like you have a recommender system, and output of the system is vector representation of users, and basically for each user you can find out the other users that are similar to this user, and then use that for segmenting.
That it's possible, but in the gaming industry, it may be a bit difficult because it's kind of an offline setting if you think about it, because a user may download a game and then uh, the game may have not been designed to share the feedback and the user interaction, like how the user is playing and how is he reacting to different kinds of to the game elements. So such user based similarity may not be practical in such situation, I believe.
Okay, makes sense. Yeah. Okay, I think that's all we have. Like, if you have any last minute question, now it's the right time to ask it.
Mhm. No, I think
Yeah,
I'll
I don't
just.
see anything. Yeah. So thank you very much for coming today and presenting it and attending. Thanks, Nishant.
It was
Uh,
great talking to you, Alexei, and it was a nice experience presenting this.
yes.
Mm.
So see you next week.
Yep, sure. Right.
Goodbye.
Bye bye.